The morning sun cast long shadows across the Navy SEAL compound in Virginia Beach as Commander Jake Morrison watched his elite team prepare for what promised to be their most challenging mission yet. These were men who had earned their tridents through blood, sweat, and an unbreakable will to succeed. They were the best of the best, warriors who had proven themselves in the deadliest corners of the world. But today, something was different. Something that had every operator on edge, though none would admit it openly. Standing apart from the group, checking her equipment with methodical precision, was a woman whose very presence seemed to command the respect these hardened warriors rarely gave to outsiders. She wore no uniform that identified her unit, carried no badge that proclaimed her authority, and her personnel file remained classified at levels that made even seasoned intelligence officers uncomfortable. Sarah Chun moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. At 5 feet 6 inches tall, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she might have passed for an ordinary civilian on any city street. But her eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had looked through a scope at distances most people couldn't even imagine, someone who had made impossible shots when lives hung in the balance. The SEALs had been told only that she would be accompanying them on their mission into hostile territory. No rank was given, no unit designation provided, just a name and the simple instruction that she was to be treated as their primary marksman for the operation. For a group of men who prided themselves on their shooting skills, this was more than unusual. It was unprecedented. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez, a veteran of 3 deployments and the team's designated marksman, watched Sarah adjust her rifle scope with practiced ease. He had been shooting competitively since he was 12 years old and had never missed a target that mattered in combat. The idea that this unknown woman was being brought in to do his job sat heavy in his stomach like a cold stone. "You ever hear of her before?" Rodriguez whispered to his teammate, Chief Petty Officer Tom Bradley, as they watched Sarah conduct her pre-mission weapons check. Bradley shook his head slowly. "Nobody has. Word is she's some kind of ghost. No official record, no unit patch, no nothing. But the brass is treating her like she's some kind of shooting legend." Across the staging area, Sarah continued her methodical preparation. Her rifle was a custom piece of equipment that none of the SEALs recognized, though they could tell it was built for extreme precision at extraordinary distances. Every movement she made spoke of countless hours of training and real-world experience. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes, just the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. Commander Morrison approached the mystery sniper as she finished her equipment check. "Chun, are you ready for the mission briefing?" She looked up at him with those steady, measuring eyes. "Always ready, Commander. Your men seem concerned about my presence here." Morrison glanced over at his team, noting the way they kept stealing looks in Sarah's direction. "They're professionals. They'll adapt." "I'm sure they will," Sarah replied, her voice carrying just a hint of something that might have been amusement. "But I understand their hesitation. Trust is earned in our line of work, not given." The mission briefing took place in a windowless room where maps covered every available surface and intelligence photos showed their target location in devastating detail. The objective was simple in concept, but nightmarish in execution. Extract a high-value intelligence asset from a heavily fortified compound in hostile territory. The compound sat on a rocky plateau, surrounded by open ground, making a direct assault virtually impossible. The only viable approach required precise elimination of sentries at ranges exceeding 800 meters, shots that would need to be taken in sequence without alerting the remaining guards. One miss, one moment of imprecision, and the entire mission would collapse into a firefight that none of them could win. As the intelligence officer outlined the target positions, Sarah studied the satellite imagery with the focused intensity of a chess master analyzing a complex endgame. She asked pointed questions about wind patterns, elevation changes, and the timing of guard rotations. Her questions revealed a depth of knowledge about long-range shooting that impressed even the mission planners. The first target is positioned here, the briefing officer explained, pointing to a guard tower on the compound's western edge. Range approximately 920 meters from the nearest viable shooting position. The second target will be visible from the same position at roughly 850 meters. Rodriguez leaned forward in his chair. That's assuming perfect conditions. With any wind or atmospheric disturbance, those shots become nearly impossible. Sarah turned to look at him directly for the first time since arriving at the compound. Nearly impossible is still possible, Petty Officer Rodriguez. That's why I'm here. Her words weren't boastful or arrogant. They were simply stated fact, delivered with the quiet confidence of someone who had made such shots before under conditions that would break lesser marksmen. The room fell silent as the weight of her certainty settled over the assembled warriors. After the briefing, the team moved to the range for final weapons checks and zeroing. This was where Sarah would either prove herself worthy of their respect or reveal herself as another desk warrior with more reputation than skill. The SEALs gathered around as she approached the firing line, their skepticism barely concealed. The targets were set at varying distances, the farthest reaching out to 1,000 meters. It was a range that challenged even the most skilled marksmen among them, especially under the time constraints they faced. Rodriguez had shot a perfect score at this distance only twice in his entire career. Sarah took her position behind her rifle without fanfare or ceremony. She checked her scope settings with quick, efficient movements, then settled into her shooting position with the natural ease of someone who had done this countless thousands of times before. Her breathing slowed to a controlled rhythm as she acquired her first target. The first shot rang out across the range, followed immediately by the metallic ping of a perfect hit at 800 meters. She worked the bolt smoothly, acquired the next target, and fired again. Another perfect hit at 900 meters. She continued this pattern, moving from target to target with mechanical precision, never missing, never hesitating. What impressed the watching SEALs wasn't just her accuracy. They had all seen excellent shooting before. It was the speed with which she moved between targets and the absolute consistency of her performance. There was no warm-up period, no settling in, just immediate perfection from the first round fired. When she finished the course of fire, Sarah stood and stepped back from her rifle. She had fired 20 rounds at targets ranging from 500 to 1,000 meters. All 20 shots had found their marks with precision that bordered on the supernatural. More importantly, she had completed the course in roughly half the time it would have taken most expert marksmen. The range fell silent except for the distant sound of flags snapping in the wind. Rodriguez stared at the target board that displayed Sarah's performance, his face reflecting the mixture of admiration and disbelief that every man present was feeling. He had just witnessed shooting that exceeded anything he had thought humanly possible. "Holy hell," whispered Chief Bradley, voicing what everyone was thinking but no one wanted to say. Sarah began breaking down her rifle for transport, her movements as methodical as everything else she did. She didn't acknowledge the impressed stares or wait for compliments. This was simply her job, performed to the standard that had made her legendary among those few who knew her true capabilities. Commander Morrison approached her as she secured her equipment case. "That was quite a demonstration, Chun." She looked up at him with those same steady eyes. "It wasn't a demonstration, Commander. It was a warm-up. Tomorrow's work will require considerably more precision." As the team prepared to depart for their mission staging area, Rodriguez found himself walking alongside the mysterious sniper. His earlier skepticism had been completely erased by what he had witnessed on the range, replaced by a curiosity about who this woman really was and where she had learned to shoot with such devastating accuracy. "Can I ask where you trained?" he said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Sarah glanced at him sideways, considering her response. "Many places, Petty Officer. Some of them don't appear on any official maps." It was an answer that revealed nothing while suggesting everything. Rodriguez understood that he was in the presence of someone whose background was classified far beyond his clearance level, someone who operated in the shadows where official records didn't exist, and success was measured only by mission completion. As their transport helicopter lifted off from the Virginia Beach compound, Sarah stared out at the darkening landscape below. Tomorrow would bring challenges that would test every skill she had developed over her mysterious career. But tonight, she had taken the first step toward earning the respect of some of the world's most elite warriors. The SEALs who had doubted her presence just hours earlier now found themselves looking forward to seeing what she could accomplish when the stakes were real and failure meant death. They had witnessed something extraordinary on the range, but they all understood that range shooting was only a preview of what combat would demand. In the growing darkness of the helicopter's cabin, Sarah Chun closed her eyes and began the mental preparation that had kept her alive through operations that existed only in the classified files of intelligence agencies. Tomorrow would prove whether her reputation was earned or simply legend. But for the first time in years, she found herself looking forward to the test. The insertion went smoothly despite the hostile territory they now found themselves traversing. Under cover of darkness, the team had fast-roped from their helicopter into a rocky valley 3 kilometers from their target. The compound they needed to infiltrate sat like a concrete fortress on the plateau above them, its lights creating an artificial daylight that made their approach even more treacherous. Sarah moved through the rocky terrain with the same quiet efficiency she had displayed at the firing range. Unlike some of the SEALs who relied on their physical strength and aggressive tactics, she navigated obstacles with an almost feline grace that left barely a trace of her passage. Rodriguez, following closely behind her, found himself impressed not just by her shooting skills, but by her complete tactical awareness. The team established their overwatch position on a ridge that offered clear lines of sight to the compound, while providing natural concealment among the weathered boulders. From this vantage point, they could observe the guard rotations and confirm the intelligence they had received during their briefing. Everything matched the satellite imagery and surveillance reports perfectly. Commander Morrison studied the target through his binoculars while Sarah set up her shooting position with methodical precision. Her movements were deliberate and practiced, each adjustment to her rifle and equipment serving a specific purpose in the complex equation of long-range precision shooting. Winds are variable, she reported quietly, consulting a small electronic device that measured atmospheric conditions, gusting from the northwest at 8 to 12 miles per hour. Temperature differential between our position and the target will affect trajectory by approximately 2 inches at this range. Chief Bradley watched her make minute adjustments to her scope, compensating for factors that most marksmen never even considered. The mathematics of extreme long-range shooting were complex enough to challenge graduate students. Yet Sarah performed these calculations with the casual ease of someone checking the time. The first target was exactly where intelligence had promised he would be. A guard stood in the southwestern tower, his position offering him command of the most likely approach routes to the compound. At 920 meters, he represented the kind of shot that separated expert marksmen from legends. The margin for error was measured in fractions of inches, and any mistake would compromise the entire mission. Sarah settled behind her rifle and began the breathing routine that preceded every shot. Her pulse slowed to the controlled rhythm that allowed for the precise timing required at these distances. Through her scope, the target appeared close enough to touch, though she knew that even the slightest environmental factor could turn a perfect shot into a complete miss. Target acquired, she whispered into her radio. Standing by for your command. Morrison continued his observation of the compound, waiting for the optimal moment when guard positions and patrol patterns would provide the maximum window for success. The timing had to be perfect. Once Sarah fired her first shot, they would have perhaps 90 seconds before the alarm was raised, and their mission became impossible. Wind has settled, Sarah reported. Atmospheric conditions stable. Ready to engage. Take the shot, Morrison commanded. The rifle's report echoed across the valley like controlled thunder. Even as the sound reached the compound, Sarah was already working the bolt and acquiring her second target. The first guard simply vanished from his position, falling silently into the tower where his body would remain undiscovered until the next shift change. Her second shot followed 23 seconds later, removing the northeastern guard with the same clinical precision. The bullet traveled across nearly 900 meters of hostile airspace to find its target with accuracy that defied belief. Again, the guard simply disappeared from his post without sound or drama. Rodriguez watched through his own scope as Sarah continued her deadly work. Each shot was a masterpiece of precision and timing, removing threats with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. She moved between targets with practiced ease, her breathing never elevated, her movements economical and controlled. The third target presented additional challenges. He was partially concealed behind concrete barriers, offering only brief windows of exposure as he moved through his patrol pattern. Sarah had to time her shot to coincide with a moment of visibility that lasted perhaps 2 seconds at most. She tracked the guard's movement through her scope, learning his rhythm and predicting his next position. When he stepped into her line of sight for the critical instant, her rifle spoke again. The shot covered over 1,000 meters before finding its target with the same devastating accuracy as the previous rounds. "Jesus Christ," whispered Petty Officer Jackson, who had been observing through binoculars. "She's making this look easy." But Sarah knew better than anyone that there was nothing easy about what she was doing. Each shot required complete mastery of multiple variables that could change in an instant. Wind speed and direction, atmospheric pressure, temperature gradients, the precise range to target, the movement patterns of her objectives, all of these factors had to be calculated and compensated for in the brief seconds before firing. The fourth and final target proved to be the most challenging of all. He was positioned on the compound's eastern wall at a range of nearly 1,100 meters, well beyond the effective range of most sniper rifles. The shot would require every skill Sarah had developed over her mysterious career, pushing the boundaries of what was physically possible. She studied the target through her scope, noting his position and the environmental factors that would affect her bullet's flight path. At this extreme range, even the rotation of the Earth had to be considered in her calculations. The Coriolis effect would deflect her bullet by several inches during its flight time, requiring compensation that few marksmen even understood. "Range confirmed at 1,097 meters, she reported quietly. "Elevation difference 32 meters. Crosswind now steady at 10 miles per hour from the northwest." Sarah made final adjustments to her scope and shooting position, accounting for every variable she could measure and several that she could only estimate based on experience. Her finger found the trigger as her breathing settled into the controlled pattern that preceded her most difficult shots. The target moved in his position, presenting a clear silhouette against the compound's lighting. Sarah's world narrowed to the precise point where her crosshairs intersected with her objective. Everything else, the rocky ground beneath her, the quiet breathing of her teammates, the distant sounds of the night, faded into irrelevance. Her rifle fired with the same authoritative crack as her previous shots. The bullet began its long journey across the hostile landscape, carrying with it the success or failure of their entire mission. At this extreme range, the projectile would require nearly 2 seconds to reach its target, time enough for doubt to creep into the mind of a lesser marksman. But Sarah felt no doubt. She had made this calculation countless times before under conditions that range from merely difficult to utterly impossible. Her finger was already working the bolt, preparing for a follow-up shot that she somehow knew would not be necessary. The distant figure on the compound wall simply crumpled and fell from view. Her fourth perfect shot had found its mark across a distance that challenged the very limits of the rifle's capability and her own extraordinary skills. The compound fell into the deceptive quiet that preceded discovery of the guard's absence. Morrison knew they had perhaps 15 minutes before the next patrol would notice that critical positions were unmanned. 15 minutes to infiltrate a facility that had been designed to withstand determined assault by conventional forces. Outstanding work, Morrison told Sarah as she began breaking down her shooting position. I've never seen shooting like that outside of complete fiction. She looked up from securing her rifle, those steady eyes reflecting neither pride nor false modesty. This is what I do, Commander. Your men handle the close work from here. The SEALs moved toward their objective with renewed confidence, knowing that the most dangerous phase of their approach had been completed with a precision that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. The woman who had appeared without credentials or official recognition had just demonstrated capabilities that placed her among the finest marksmen in military history. As they prepared for the next phase of their mission, Rodriguez found himself looking back toward the position where Sarah had performed her deadly craft. 4 shots, for targets eliminated at ranges that most snipers would consider impossible. She had made it appear effortless, but he understood that what he had witnessed represented the culmination of years of training and experience that few humans would ever possess. The compound's security had been broken by a woman whose very existence was denied by official records, whose skills were whispered about in the classified corridors of intelligence agencies. But her bullets didn't care about paperwork or recognition. They found their targets with mathematical precision, clearing the path for warriors who had thought they had seen everything the shooting world had to offer. Sarah Chun had proven herself in the most definitive way possible, not with words or credentials, but with performance that spoke louder than any badge or official record ever could. The SEALs who had questioned her presence now understood why she was here, why her reputation existed in whispered conversations among those who knew what real precision shooting looked like. The mission continued, but the foundation for its success had been laid by a woman whose mysterious background was suddenly far less important than her undeniable capability. She had earned their respect through the oldest currency warriors understood, demonstrated excellence when failure meant death. The extraction of their high-value target proceeded with textbook precision, made possible by Sarah's elimination of the compound's outer security. The SEALs moved through the facility like ghosts, their path cleared by shooting that had transformed an impossible mission into a manageable tactical problem. Within 47 minutes of Sarah's first shot, they were moving toward their extraction point with their objective secured. But their troubles were far from over. Intelligence reports had failed to account for a rapid response team that was now moving to intercept them before they could reach their pickup zone. The team found themselves pinned down in a rocky valley with enemy forces approaching from multiple directions, their extraction helicopter forced to abort its approach due to hostile fire. Commander Morrison assessed their tactical situation with the grim professionalism of someone who had survived similar circumstances through careful planning and aggressive action. They were outnumbered by at least 3-1, trapped in terrain that offered limited concealment, with their extraction delayed indefinitely by enemy activity around their planned pickup zone. "We need to break their momentum," Morrison told his team as they established a defensive perimeter among the scattered boulders. "If they can coordinate their approach, we're going to be overwhelmed." Sarah had already identified several positions where enemy leaders were directing the assault against their position. At ranges exceeding 600 meters, these targets presented opportunities to disrupt the coordinated attack that threatened to overrun their small force. But the shooting conditions were far more challenging than anything she had faced at the compound. Wind gusted unpredictably through the rocky valley, creating turbulence that made precision shooting extremely difficult. Dust and debris filled the air from recent explosions, reducing visibility and affecting atmospheric conditions. Most critically, she would be shooting at moving targets who were actively trying to avoid detection, not stationary guards following predictable patterns. "I can see their command element," Sarah reported as she studied the enemy positions through her scope. "Multiple targets at varying ranges. They're using cover effectively, but I should be able to disrupt their coordination." She selected her first target, an enemy commander who was directing fire teams from a position behind a large boulder roughly 700 meters from their location. The shot would require her to thread her bullet through a gap in the rocks that measured less than 18 inches across, all while compensating for variable wind conditions and the target's intermittent movement. Rodriguez watched her prepare for the shot, noting the additional time she was taking to study environmental conditions. This wasn't the controlled precision of the compound assault. This was combat shooting under pressure, where mistakes could cost the lives of everyone in their small force. Sarah's rifle spoke with its characteristic authority, and the distant figure directing enemy movements simply vanished behind his cover. The immediate effect was visible as several fire teams lost their coordination and began moving without clear tactical purpose. One perfect shot had begun the process of dismantling their attacker's command structure. Her second shot removed an enemy marksman who had been providing overwatch for the advancing forces. At a range of over 800 meters, the target was barely visible through the dust and heat shimmer that distorted the air between their positions. But Sarah's bullet found its mark with the same devastating accuracy she had demonstrated throughout their mission. The psychological effect of her shooting was becoming apparent among the enemy forces. Soldiers who had been advancing with confidence were now moving more cautiously, aware that death could reach them from distances they had thought were safe. Their attack began to lose cohesion as individual fighters sought cover from a sniper they couldn't locate or engage. Helicopter inbound, Morrison announced as their extraction aircraft finally approached the valley. But they're reporting heavy ground fire around the primary pickup zone. We need to clear a path to the alternate extraction point. The alternate location was nearly a kilometer away across open ground that was swept by enemy fire. Moving their force across such exposed terrain would normally be suicidal, but Sarah's ability to eliminate key threats might provide the edge they needed to reach safety. She began the systematic destruction of enemy positions that commanded the route to their extraction point. Each shot required split-second timing and compensation for factors that change with every round fired. The dust and smoke from ongoing combat created a shifting environment where visibility fluctuated from moment to moment. Working methodically from one target to the next, Sarah eliminated threat after threat with precision that seemed to defy the chaotic conditions around them. Enemy machine gunners, RPG operators, and forward observers fell to her rifle with mechanical regularity. Each successful shot opened another corridor of movement for the SEALs who would have to traverse the deadly ground ahead. Chief Bradley watched her work with growing amazement. Under combat conditions that would challenge the world's finest marksmen, she was performing at a level that exceeded anything he had thought possible. The woman who had arrived without credentials was proving herself to be exactly what her mysterious reputation had promised. Moving, Morrison commanded as Sarah's covering fire created a window of opportunity. The team began their movement toward the extraction point, bounding from cover to cover, while Sarah continued to engage threats that emerged along their route. Her shooting had to be perfect. Any miss would allow enemy fire to pin down the exposed SEALs and potentially destroy their entire force. She tracked a rocket-propelled grenade operator who was attempting to engage their extraction helicopter. The target was moving quickly between defensive positions, offering only brief moments of exposure. Sarah had to time her shot to coincide with a moment when the enemy fighter would be vulnerable, all while calculating the complex ballistics required to hit a moving target at extreme range. Her rifle fired just as the enemy soldier raised his weapon toward their helicopter. The bullet reached its target an instant before he could fire, preventing an attack that would have destroyed their only means of escape. The RPG operator fell backward into his position, his weapon unfired, and his threat permanently eliminated. The extraction proceeded smoothly once the immediate threats had been neutralized by Sarah's devastating marksmanship. As their helicopter lifted off from the hostile valley, the SEALs found themselves looking at their mysterious sniper with a combination of respect and curiosity that bordered on awe. During the flight back to friendly territory, Rodriguez finally found the courage to ask the question that had been bothering him since their first meeting. Who are you really? I mean, where did you learn to shoot like that? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the landscape passing below their aircraft. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of experiences that few people would ever understand. I started shooting competitively when I was 8 years old, she began, her words barely audible over the helicopter's engines. My father was a Marine sniper in Vietnam. He taught me that precision shooting wasn't just about hitting targets. It was about taking responsibility for every bullet you fire. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. I joined the Army when I was 18 and qualified for sniper school within 6 months. After that, I spent 3 years with conventional forces before someone noticed that I could make shots other people couldn't. Rodriguez leaned forward, drawn into her story despite himself. Special operations recruited me for assignments that don't appear in any official records. Counterterrorism, hostage rescue, target elimination in denied areas. For the past 8 years, I've been operating in places where failure means more than personal death. It means the success of people who want to hurt innocent civilians. She turned to look directly at Rodriguez, those steady eyes reflecting experiences that had shaped her into the warrior they had witnessed in action. Every shot I take in the field is for someone who can't protect themselves. Every target I eliminate is someone who won't have the opportunity to hurt people who don't deserve to be hurt. That's what gives me the focus to make impossible shots under conditions that would break other marksmen. Commander Morrison had been listening to their conversation from his position near the helicopter's crew chief station. The official story is that you don't exist. No service record, no unit assignment, no recognition for any of your achievements. Sarah nodded slowly. That's the price of doing work that can't be acknowledged officially. No medals, no recognition, no public record of service. But I've never needed external validation to know that what I do matters. Chief Bradley spoke up from his position across the cabin. After what we've seen today, you have the respect of every operator in this unit. Official recognition or not, you've proven yourself among people who understand what real capability looks like. The helicopter continued its journey back to friendly territory, carrying a team of elite warriors who had been forever changed by their experience, with someone whose very existence challenged their understanding of what was possible in their profession. Sarah Chun had arrived as a mystery and an unwelcome outsider, but she was leaving as something far more valuable, a legend whose reputation had been forged in the crucible of actual combat. As they approached their base, Sarah began the mental process of transitioning back to the shadowy world where her extraordinary skills were deployed against threats that the public would never know existed. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new challenges, and new opportunities to demonstrate the capabilities that made her invaluable to operations that existed only in classified files. But for the first time in years, she had worked alongside people who truly understood what she brought to the fight. The SEALs who had questioned her presence had become witnesses to shooting that would be discussed in whispered conversation for years to come. Stories of a woman who could make impossible shots when everything depended on precision and timing. Rodriguez watched her prepare for their arrival, noting the same methodical attention to detail that had characterized everything she did throughout their mission. She was already planning her next operation, already considering the factors that would determine success or failure in future engagements. No badge, no official record, no public recognition, but the woman who called herself Sarah Chun had proven that some truths were more important than paperwork. Her presence had forced every SEAL in the unit to reconsider their understanding of what excellence really meant, and her shooting had saved their lives when conventional tactics would have failed. She remained a mystery in many ways, her background hidden behind classification levels that exceeded most security clearances. But her capabilities were no longer in question, and her place among the world's finest warriors had been established through the oldest and most reliable method known to their profession: performance when it mattered most. The legend was real, and they had been privileged to witness it in action.